He worked quietly, almost like he wasn't there. Every day, he walked through the tall glass doors of the building, pushing his cleaning cart, moving through the lobby with careful, practiced steps. The shiny floors reflected the busy lives of the people who passed by, and he made sure every corner was spotless. Most people barely noticed him. Some smiled politely when he nodded at them, but most just hurried past, focused on their own schedules. To them, he was just the janitor, invisible, unimportant, someone whose job was simple and easy, but he wasn't invisible to everyone. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he would pause near the grand piano that sat in the center of the lobby. The piano was polished and beautiful, a true piece of art, but no one ever played it during the day. The sounds of work carts and footsteps usually drowned out any quiet thoughts. He would run his fingers lightly over the keys when the coast was clear, just pressing a note or two, feeling the smoothness under his fingertips. The music always made him smile, even if no one else knew it existed. He had always loved the piano. From a young age, he had spent hours practicing, teaching himself from old books he found at the library. It had never been easy. There was no fancy teacher, no grand piano at home. He had to fight to find time, sneaking into rooms where old instruments sat unused, teaching himself the scales, the chords, the songs that would later make hearts stop. Music had become his secret, the part of him that no one saw, the part of him that made him feel alive. In the lobby, he kept this life hidden. The building's visitors, the business people rushing through, the tourists snapping pictures in the lobby, none of them imagined what he could do. They saw a man with a broom, a mop, and a bucket, moving quietly, never speaking more than necessary. Some people might have looked at him and thought he didn't have ambitions, dreams, or talents. They were wrong. He had a world inside him, one built on melodies, rhythms, and emotions that he had carried in silence for years. Some days were harder than others. When people made jokes about the janitor or brushed him off, it hurt more than they could know. He would smile, nod, and continue his work, but inside he felt the sting of being overlooked. At night, when he returned home, he would sit quietly and play on his small keyboard. His fingers moved as if they remembered every note he had ever learned. Music was his way of escaping the world that didn't see him. It reminded him that he was more than a title or a job, that he had something special inside, something waiting for the right moment to be heard. One afternoon, the lobby was busy with people. A group of guests had gathered for a small event in the building, talking loudly, laughing, and taking photos. The grand piano sat quietly in the middle, untouched, almost forgotten. He continued sweeping nearby, careful not to draw attention, feeling both excitement and nervousness. He loved music, yes, but showing it in front of a crowd? That was a different kind of challenge. He had never played for strangers, not like this. Not in a room full of judgment. As he worked, he noticed the guests glancing at him. Some whispered to each other, smiling, and one of them joked, "Hey, janitor, why don't you show us what you can do on that piano?" Laughter followed. The comment was meant to be funny, to tease. Most of the people didn't expect anything at all. They thought it was a joke. He felt his heart race. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to continue his work quietly and pretend he hadn't heard. But another part of him, the part that had spent years dreaming of being seen, whispered, "Maybe this is the moment." He paused for a moment, standing with his broom in hand, staring at the piano. The polished keys gleamed in the sunlight, calling him, almost daring him to step closer. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes, even if most of them didn't really expect him to play anything beautiful. He knew that if he tried and failed, it would be embarrassing. But if he tried and succeeded, it could change everything. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the cleaning cart aside. Each step toward the piano felt heavy but meaningful, like he was stepping into a new world. People started to notice him more, the laughter dying down as curiosity replaced it. "Is he really going to play?" Someone whispered. He didn't speak. He just sat down on the piano bench, his fingers hovering above the keys. The room grew quieter. As if the piano itself was waiting for him to begin, he remembered the lessons he had learned on his own. How every note mattered, how music could tell a story without words. He thought of the long nights, of the times he had practiced until his fingers ached, of the dreams that had been locked away inside him for years. And then, slowly, carefully, he pressed the first key dot. It was a single note, soft but clear. The sound filled the room, cutting through the chatter and the footsteps. People stopped, turning their heads. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise. It was just one note, but it was enough to make them pause and listen. He smiled slightly, feeling the energy shift. The piano was alive in his hands, and for the first time, the janitor and their eyes felt a little less invisible. He continued, letting his fingers move with confidence. Each chord, each melody, flowed naturally, as if the piano had been waiting for him all this time. The music grew richer, more emotional, and the room that had been filled with laughter and conversation became still. People leaned in, listening more closely than they ever had. Some gasped softly. Some whispered to each other, unsure of what they were witnessing. The janitor, the man they had overlooked, was creating something magical for him. The moment was freeing. All the years of quiet work, of secret practice, of being underestimated, felt worth it now. Every note he played told a story, one of patience, passion, and hidden talent. He didn't need applause yet. He didn't need recognition yet. He just needed to play. And as the music continued, it became clear that he was not just a janitor. He was an artist, a storyteller, someone whose gift had been waiting for the right moment to shine. The crowd could feel it too. The energy in the room changed. The joking, the laughter, the doubts, all of it faded. In its place was awe, respect, and wonder. People who had ignored him just minutes ago now watched him with completely new eyes. The janitor, who had always moved quietly through their world, had stepped into the light in the only way he knew how, through music. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if anyone would invite him to perform again, or if they would simply return to their busy lives. But for that moment he felt seen. He felt powerful. He felt free. And that was enough. Music had given him a voice, a way to show the world that he was more than anyone could guess. And as the last notes lingered in the air, soft and fading, he allowed himself a quiet smile, knowing that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The room had been lively just moments ago. Guests were chatting, laughing, taking selfies, and walking past the grand piano without giving it much thought. But now, after that single note from the janitor, everything changed. There was a sudden silence, almost like the air itself was holding its breath. People stopped mid-conversation, glancing toward him, unsure of what to expect next. Some of the guests exchanged glances, their laughter replaced with curiosity. A few whispered quietly, "Did you hear that? And is he really going to play more?" Their faces showed surprise, disbelief, and even a hint of doubt. They had come expecting a little joke, maybe a laugh at the janitor's expense, but instead, they were met with something entirely unexpected. The janitor remained seated. His fingers hovering above the keys, his eyes focused but calm. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room, yet he did not falter. His mind, trained by years of practice, guided his hands naturally. He didn't play to impress anyone. He played because the music demanded it, because the notes flowed from years of hidden devotion. From every late night spent practicing when no one was watching, some guests began nudging each other, smiling awkwardly. They had underestimated him, just as they had underestimated so many people in their lives. A woman in a sharp business suit whispered, "I didn't expect him to know anything about music." Her tone carried both surprise and a growing respect. A man near the elevator leaned forward, eyes wide, as though trying to memorize every detail of what was happening. The janitor's music had a strange, magnetic effect. It demanded attention, even from those who had been skeptical, yet not everyone was convinced immediately. A small group of teenagers sitting near the corner of the lobby giggled quietly. "Come on, it's just a janitor," one of them said, shrugging. "He can't really play." Their laughter was nervous, uncertain, as if they weren't sure whether they were being rude or simply honest. But as the janitor began playing again, this time a soft melody with delicate chords, their laughter died out. Their eyes grew wider. Their whispers turned to silence. Even the most skeptical could not ignore the emotion in his music. He was careful with every note, letting the melody rise and fall naturally. Each chord seemed to tell a story, stories of quiet struggle, of unseen effort, of dreams that had been tucked away for years. People who had ignored him, walked past him, or laughed at him suddenly felt a strange connection. They could sense the years of dedication behind every note, and it created a feeling of shared humanity. Meanwhile, he could feel the crowd's energy shift. The people who had been laughing were now leaning forward, listening intently. Phones appeared in hands as guests instinctively wanted to capture the moment. Some whispered, "This is amazing," while others simply watched, unable to speak. He could feel it, the disbelief, the awe, and the growing respect in the room. Music had leveled the playing field in an instant. Titles, jobs, appearances, none of that mattered anymore. Despite the attention, he didn't let it distract him. He had learned long ago how to focus entirely on the music, how to let it guide him instead of letting nerves take over. Every note, every chord, every pause was intentional. It was his language, his way of speaking without words. And the room was finally listening. As he continued to play, he noticed something subtle but powerful. A young child, no older than 8, stood near the back of the room, eyes wide, completely still. The child's mother had been trying to get him to leave, to move along, but he refused, drawn in by the music. In that moment, the janitor realized that music could reach anyone. Age, background, or social status didn't matter. It had the power to move hearts instantly. Some of the older guests who had been busy checking their watches were now frozen. They had come to the building for an event, with schedules and appointments to keep, but the music had pulled them into a different reality. They were forgetting time, forgetting their roles, forgetting judgments. All they could do was listen. There was a mixture of emotions in the crowd: surprise, joy, admiration, and even a bit of shame. People were realizing that they had judged him too quickly. They had seen a janitor and assumed he was ordinary, when in reality he was extraordinary. In a single moment, he had shattered their assumptions. The laughter and mockery of before had vanished. Replaced by awe and respect, one older man, leaning against a wall, whispered to his companion, "I've been in this building for years and never noticed him like this." His companion nodded, eyes glued to the janitor's hands as they danced across the keys. "It's incredible," she replied softly. "All this time. And we never knew." Their words, spoken quietly, reflected the sentiment growing throughout the room. Even the teenagers who had been skeptical at first were now captivated. Their expressions had shifted from amusement to astonishment. One of them muttered, "I can't believe he's playing like that." Another simply stared, silent, letting the music wash over them. They had expected a joke, but instead, they were witnessing something magical, a real-life demonstration of hidden talent and dedication. The janitor continued, moving into a more complex section of the piece. The melody became richer, more expressive. The room seemed to lean in closer, as if the walls themselves were listening. Each note carried emotion, a blend of hope, struggle, and triumph. People felt it in their hearts. They didn't know his story yet, but the music told them enough. They understood that he had worked for years to reach this level, quietly, without recognition or praise. For the janitor, it wasn't about the crowd or their reactions. He was lost in the music, in the flow of every sound. But he could feel it, a connection forming between him and the listeners. He wasn't just playing notes. He was communicating something deeper. Every chord resonated with people who had ever felt overlooked or underestimated. Somehow, the room had become a shared space of understanding and empathy, built entirely through sound. The laughter that had greeted the joke earlier now seemed distant, almost unbelievable. People who had come to mock or dismiss him were now completely silent. Their expressions changed, their minds reconsidering every assumption. Music had given him a voice that words could never match. The janitor, who had been invisible, was now the center of attention, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it naturally through talent and passion. And yet, even with all eyes on him, he remained humble. He didn't play for fame or approval. He played because he loved it, because it was a part of him that could not be contained. The audience could sense this sincerity, this authenticity, and it made the performance even more powerful. People respected him not just for his skill, but for his humility and courage to share his secret with the world. The room had completely transformed. The small event, once filled with casual chatter and polite smiles, was now something unforgettable. Every guest was engaged, watching a janitor who had become a musician in front of their eyes. They had come expecting a joke, a brief moment of amusement, but instead, they were experiencing a revelation that talent can be hidden anywhere, and that assumptions can be misleading. As the music played on, the janitor could sense that this moment would stay with people long after they left. They would remember it, talk about it, and perhaps even reflect on how they viewed others in their daily lives. He had shown them that appearances are deceptive, that every person has a story, and sometimes extraordinary talent hides in the most ordinary places. Finally, he let the music soften, each note fading gently. The crowd, though still silent, was fully present. They had been transformed by the performance. The laughter, the jokes, the doubts, all gone. What remained was admiration, respect, and wonder. People realized they had witnessed something rare, something special, something they would never forget. And in that moment, the janitor felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had shared his secret not for recognition but to connect. And connect he did. Even in a room full of strangers, he had touched hearts. The first barrier had been broken. The world that had seen only a janitor was now beginning to see the person behind the uniform, a person with a story, a dream, and a talent that could not be ignored. The janitor's fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, creating melodies that filled every corner of the lobby. Each note seemed to float in the air, gentle at first, then growing stronger and more confident. The guests who had been quietly observing could feel the emotion behind every chord. The music was no longer just sound. It was a story, a journey, a message that spoke to everyone present. He played with a rhythm that made people hold their breath. It was as if he was telling them a secret through the piano, one that had been kept for years. People had thought he was just a janitor, someone ordinary, someone to laugh at. But now, with every note, their assumptions were being shattered. They could see, without a doubt, that this man had something extraordinary hidden inside him. Some guests covered their mouths in surprise. They hadn't expected anything so powerful, so moving. The music didn't just entertain them. It made them feel something deep in their hearts. Some swayed slightly to the rhythm, others closed their eyes to focus completely on the sound. Even the busiest business people, who had been checking their phones moments ago, were now fully present. The janitor had captured their attention, and it was impossible to look away. A woman near the center of the room whispered to her friend, "He's amazing." "I can't believe it." Her friend nodded, unable to speak. Their eyes were fixed on the janitor, watching every movement of his hands. Every key he pressed seemed to reveal more about him, his dedication, his struggles, and the years of practice that no one had ever seen. It was clear that this was not just talent. This was passion, combined with hard work and an unwavering love for music. The janitor continued to play, his hands moving faster now, yet with precision. The melody shifted, becoming more complex, more emotional. People who had come to the lobby for casual conversation were now completely silent, listening intently. Even the skeptics, the ones who had whispered jokes at first, were now leaning forward, their expressions filled with amazement. They had been caught off guard, and now they were witnesses to something truly extraordinary. He could feel the energy in the room change. The air seemed heavier, as if the music had pulled everyone into a shared experience. The whispers and laughter that had greeted him earlier were gone. In their place was awe and respect. Every chord he played seemed to demand attention, to demand understanding. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for him to unlock its full potential. And now it was singing under his hands. A young girl standing near the edge of the crowd had tears in her eyes. She didn't know the janitor or his story, but she could feel the emotion in the music. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, unable to speak, letting the melody wash over her. In that moment, the janitor's music had transcended words, reaching people in a way nothing else could. It wasn't just a performance. It was a connection, a bridge between his heart and everyone watching. The janitor's mind was fully immersed in the music. He didn't think about the crowd, their reactions, or their expectations. He didn't play for recognition or praise. He played because it was who he was. Each note was an expression of himself, a reflection of his life, his dreams, and his secret that had been kept hidden for so long. The music was his way of speaking when words were never enough. As the piece grew more intense, a wave of energy swept through the crowd. People began to notice small details, the way his fingers moved with confidence, the expression on his face, the passion that seemed to radiate from every motion. Some whispered to each other, unable to contain their admiration. "I've never seen anything like this," one man said quietly. How could we have ever doubted him? Even the teenagers who had laughed earlier were now completely captivated. They had expected a joke, a moment of fun at someone else's expense. But what they were witnessing was something far greater. The janitor had taken what they assumed was ordinary and transformed it into something extraordinary. It was a lesson in humility and the danger of judging someone based on appearances alone. The music reached a peak, the notes blending together in a harmony that was both powerful and delicate. The janitor's hands moved faster, yet nothing was rushed or careless. Every movement was intentional, precise, and filled with emotion. The crowd could feel the tension and release in the music, the highs and lows, the stories that had been kept inside him finally being told. Some guests closed their eyes, letting the sound envelop them. Others watched intently, fascinated by the skill and control he displayed. No one spoke. No one moved. The room was completely silent, except for the music that seemed to breathe life into every corner of the lobby. It was as if time had stopped, leaving only the janitor and his piano, and the invisible connection he had formed with the people around him. Then, suddenly, the melody shifted. It became softer, gentler, almost like a whisper. The janitor's hands moved with a careful, delicate touch, drawing out each note with precision and emotion. The crowd leaned in, sensing the change. It was not just a shift in music. It was a shift in mood. The piece had transformed from something impressive to something deeply personal, intimate and moving. A man in a business suit placed his hand over his chest, feeling the weight of the music. A woman wiped away a tear, overwhelmed by the emotion that the janitor had managed to convey without speaking a single word. The child who had been watching from the back smiled softly, feeling comforted by the sound. Every person in the room was affected, each in their own way, but all connected by the same invisible thread, the music. He paused briefly, allowing the final notes to linger in the air. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. No one moved or spoke immediately. The audience had been completely transported, caught in a moment that felt larger than themselves. The janitor looked up, finally allowing himself to meet the eyes of the people around him. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He could see the astonishment, the admiration, and the respect on their faces. It was in that instant that the full realization hit the crowd. The man they had seen as just a janitor, someone ordinary, someone to overlook, had revealed a hidden brilliance that none of them could have anticipated. They had been wrong, completely wrong, about him. The assumptions they had made in seconds, based solely on appearances, had been shattered in minutes by nothing more than raw talent. Dedication and courage, some people whispered to each other, still trying to process what they had seen. Others simply stared, unable to find words. The energy in the room was electric, charged with admiration and disbelief. It was not just about the music. It was about the revelation that anyone, anywhere, could have hidden depth and talent, waiting for the right moment to shine. And through it all, the janitor remained humble. He didn't bask in the attention or the astonishment. He had played because it was what he loved, because it was who he was. But he could feel it. The moment had changed everything. He had not only shown his skill, but had also challenged the crowd's perceptions, reminding them of the power of humility, patience, and quiet dedication. The final chord resonated through the room, soft and lingering. The janitor lifted his hands from the keys and let the silence settle. The crowd remained still, absorbing the weight of what they had just witnessed. It was more than a performance. It was a story told without words, a truth revealed through sound, a reminder that greatness often hides in the most unexpected places, and in that silence, the janitor felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. For the first time, he had shared his secret with the world. Not for fame, not for applause, but to reveal a part of himself that had always existed, waiting patiently for the right moment. The music had spoken for him, and the world had finally listened. The moment the last note faded, the room was silent for just a heartbeat. Then, almost all at once, the energy shifted. The guests who had been skeptical, the ones who had laughed or whispered, were now leaning forward in awe. They had seen something extraordinary, something they could not unsee. Their minds raced to process what had just happened. They had come expecting a joke, a simple moment of fun. Instead, they had witnessed brilliance, and it left them speechless. People began to murmur quietly, sharing glances of astonishment. A woman near the center whispered to her companion, "I can't believe it. All this time, and we never knew." Her friend nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the janitor at the piano, who sat with quiet dignity, his hands resting gently on the keys. The room felt different now, lighter, yet filled with a sense of wonder and respect. The music had done more than impress them. It had touched them in a way that went beyond words. Some guests instinctively pulled out their phones, not to record themselves, but to capture the moment, the man who had been invisible to them, now revealed as someone extraordinary. They snapped photos and videos, eager to remember and share what they had just experienced. Even in their excitement, there was reverence. This was not a performance for show. It was a revelation, a gift, something rare and genuine. A few people approached him cautiously, unsure if it was proper to speak. "That was incredible," one man said quietly, his voice full of admiration. The janitor simply nodded, offering a humble smile. He had expected little from the crowd, yet their reactions reminded him that music had the power to reach people in ways that words never could. The applause had not started yet, but he felt it building, a slow wave of recognition and respect growing among the listeners. The audience's expressions were full of emotion. Some were stunned, mouths slightly open, eyes wide. Others had tears in their eyes, moved by the depth of feeling that came through the piano. A young girl who had been standing quietly in the corner earlier now clutched her mother's hand, her eyes shining. She whispered, "He's amazing," as if she had understood something important about dreams and courage. Even at her young age, even the skeptics, the ones who had doubted him from the start, were now watching in silence. Their earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by humility. They had assumed that a janitor could not possess talent, that someone's job defined their abilities. But in minutes, all those assumptions had been proven wrong. It was a lesson that none of them would forget. People realized that greatness could come from the most unexpected places. The janitor glanced around the room, noticing these subtle reactions. He did not play for praise, yet he could feel the connection. Each person was experiencing the music in their own way, but collectively they were changed. He realized that talent is not just about skill. It is about courage, about daring to show what lies within, even when the world doubts you. And in that moment, he had proven that courage is just as important as ability. A few older guests, who had been busy with work or meetings, now leaned in as if they were witnessing something historic. One of them murmured, "I've never seen anything like this. We judged him so quickly, and we were completely wrong." Others nodded silently. The room had become more than just a lobby. It was a space of understanding, a place where people were reminded not to underestimate others. The janitor had shown them, without a single word, that appearances can be misleading, and that everyone has a story worth hearing. The applause started slowly, almost hesitantly. People were still in awe, processing what they had just seen. Then, as if a dam had broken, claps filled the room. Hands patted tables and leaned surfaces. Phones captured videos. The sound of admiration grew louder, echoing through the lobby like a wave. The janitor, still seated at the piano, looked up in quiet surprise. He had not expected such a response, yet it felt natural, as though the music had invited it. Some guests came closer, still cautious, almost afraid to break the spell. They whispered praises, asking questions in hushed tones. "How long have you been playing?" one asked. Another added, "I can't believe we never noticed your talent before." He smiled modestly, replying softly that it had been a part of his life for a long time. He did not need to boast. The music itself had told the story better than words ever could. The children in the crowd, too, were captivated. Some had never seen anyone play like this, and their eyes were wide with wonder. They pointed at the keys, fascinated by the speed and precision of his fingers. The janitor noticed their curiosity and let a gentle smile cross his face. He remembered himself as a child, sitting alone with music, dreaming of moments like this. To see the next generation inspired by his performance filled him with a quiet pride. As the crowd settled into a state of admiration, conversations shifted. People began to talk to each other about what they had witnessed. "I thought he was just a janitor," someone said, shaking their head in disbelief. "Now I see that I was completely wrong," another added. It makes you wonder how many hidden talents exist around us. People we overlook every day. The janitor listened quietly, feeling the truth of their words. The music had not only changed how they saw him, but how they might see the world. The energy in the room was now electric, filled with respect and curiosity. Guests who had walked past him without a glance earlier were now paying attention, asking questions, engaging with him genuinely. Some tried to compliment him on his technique. Others wanted to know how he had learned to play so beautifully. Every interaction was a reminder that recognition is earned not by status, but by courage, talent, and perseverance. For the janitor, this was more than validation. It was a moment of connection. He had spent years hidden behind a mop and bucket, his talents unseen. Yet now, he could see that people were open, their hearts and minds ready to acknowledge what he had always known about himself. The music had broken barriers that words could not, leaving everyone in the room changed in a subtle but meaningful way. Some guests approached slowly, almost reverently, to shake his hand. They wanted to acknowledge the effort, the skill, the bravery it took to step into the spotlight. Others simply smiled, feeling grateful to have witnessed the performance. The janitor remained humble, nodding politely, quietly appreciating the human reactions that surrounded him. He had not sought attention, but he understood its power, how it could inspire, how it could make people reconsider their assumptions, and how it could create a sense of shared humanity. The applause began to build again, this time louder, more heartfelt. People clapped, some even standing, their admiration clear. The janitor realized that he had not only shared his music, but had also shared a message. Never underestimate anyone, and never assume you know someone's story based on appearances alone. It was a lesson delivered in the purest form, through the universal language of music. By the end of the moment, the room had transformed completely. Guests who had initially been skeptical were now humbled and inspired. They looked at the janitor not as an employee, not as someone to dismiss, but as a person with extraordinary talent, dedication, and courage. His secret had been revealed, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone of a simple truth: greatness can exist anywhere, often in places we least expect. And as the final echoes of his music faded into silence, the janitor sat quietly, feeling the shift around him. He had not asked for recognition, but it had arrived naturally. The crowd's energy, their respect, their awe, it was all a reflection of something greater than talent alone. It was a recognition of persistence, humility, and the human spirit that thrives even in unnoticed corners of life. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to soak it in. The music had done its work. The people who had once overlooked him now saw him differently. And in that recognition, he felt not just satisfaction, but hope that more people would start noticing the hidden brilliance around them, hope that more talents like his could have a chance to shine. The room remained charged with energy even after the last note had faded. People were still clapping, some even standing, their faces showing admiration, disbelief, and respect. The janitor, who had been quiet and humble the entire time, finally allowed himself a deep breath. He had shared a part of himself that had been hidden for years. And now, in the faces of those around him, he could see the impact it had made. Some guests approached him cautiously, almost afraid to interrupt the moment. "That was incredible," one said softly. You're amazing." Another added, "I never imagined someone like you could play like that." "It's inspiring." The janitor smiled politely, nodding. He didn't feel the need to boast or explain himself. The music had already spoken for him, and it had said more than words ever could. The crowd began to disperse slowly. But even as people moved, their conversations centered on what they had just witnessed. They spoke of talent, of perseverance, and of the courage it took to reveal something so personal. Many admitted to having judged him unfairly, based solely on his role as a janitor. Now, they realized how mistaken they had been. The music had challenged their assumptions, reminding them that everyone has a story, and that greatness often lies where no one expects it. A few people lingered near the piano, still mesmerized. Some took videos on their phones, while others simply watched him quietly, as if trying to memorize the moment. Children stood close, still captivated, asking their parents in whispers if he really played like that all the time. The parents nodded, feeling a mix of pride and wonder at the hidden talent before them. The janitor noticed their curiosity and smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had not only shared his music with the crowd, but had also inspired the youngest ones to believe that dreams could come true. Even in the most unlikely places, the building's management, who had been watching from a distance, stepped forward cautiously. They had always seen him as quiet and diligent, but now they saw him in a new light. One of the managers extended a hand. "I think we've all underestimated you," he said sincerely. "We'd like to discuss opportunities to showcase your talent. You deserve recognition." The janitor nodded, humble but quietly proud. Recognition had never been the goal, but now it seemed like a natural consequence of sharing his gift. People, who had initially laughed at the idea of him playing the piano, now approached with genuine respect. They wanted to know more about him, his life, and his story. They realized that he was more than a janitor. He was an artist, a storyteller, and a person who had worked quietly and diligently for years to cultivate a talent that had gone unnoticed. His humility only added to their admiration. He remembered the countless hours he had spent alone, practicing in secret. The long nights when no one was watching, the small victories and frustrations, the belief that one day someone might notice. But he had never played for fame or approval. He had played for himself because music was a part of him, and because it gave him a way to express what words could not. And now, finally, people could see that truth in front of them. The applause had slowly died down, replaced by quiet murmurs of awe and reflection. Guests who had been chatting earlier now walked around in a state of quiet admiration, sharing their thoughts in hushed tones. They discussed the courage it had taken to step forward, the precision and emotion in every note, and the lesson that appearances can be deceiving. They understood that the janitor's performance was more than music. It was a statement, a reminder that everyone has hidden depths waiting to be discovered. Some people approached him with questions about his background. "How did you learn to play like that?" one asked. The janitor's smile remained gentle. He explained briefly that he had learned on his own, practicing whenever he could, teaching himself through books, determination, and countless hours of patience. He didn't need to embellish his story. The music had already told everything. His journey, his dedication, and his talent were evident in every note he had played. Even the children who had been watching were inspired. They asked if they could try playing the piano, eager to learn, to create, and to imagine that one day they too could share something meaningful with the world. The janitor encouraged them quietly, offering a few simple tips and smiles, understanding that the joy of music is best shared and passed on. In those moments he realized that his gift had the power to inspire others. Just as he had once been inspired by the possibilities of music, the crowd slowly began to leave, but the impression lingered. People who had walked in expecting a casual event or a moment of fun had left with something far greater, a lesson in humility, perseverance, and the unexpected brilliance that exists in everyone. They would talk about this day for years, remembering the janitor who transformed a simple lobby into a stage of wonder and revelation. As the room emptied, The janitor sat quietly at the piano, letting the echoes of the performance settle in. He did not feel the need for applause or recognition. The connection he had made, the respect he had earned, and the inspiration he had sparked were enough. He realized that sharing his talent had done more than impress people. It had reminded them of something essential about life, that every person has value. Every talent has a story, and every hidden gift deserves a chance to be seen. The experience also changed him. He had always been humble, content with practicing in secret and remaining unnoticed. But now, he understood the impact of courage, of stepping forward even when the world doesn't expect it. He realized that talent is only as powerful as the willingness to share it, and that sometimes the smallest actions can leave the biggest impressions. The building, once just a place of work and routine, now felt different to him. Every corner, every shiny floor, every window reflected the memory of the crowd's reaction. It reminded him that even in ordinary places, extraordinary moments can happen. It reminded him that he had a voice, not just through music, but through every action, every choice, every moment he allowed himself to be seen. Even the janitor's colleagues, who had always seen him as quiet and reserved, now viewed him differently. They approached with smiles, some expressing admiration, others simply wanting to share the joy of witnessing something incredible. He had always been part of their team, part of the background, but now he had become someone they looked up to. Someone who had quietly taught them that everyone carries hidden brilliance. He spent the rest of the day quietly reflecting, not in pride, but in gratitude. Gratitude for the years of practice, for the moments of solitude, and for the courage to reveal himself. Gratitude for the audience who had received him with openness and respect. And gratitude for music itself, which had allowed him to speak when words were not enough. In the weeks that followed, opportunities began to appear. Invitations to perform, chances to teach, and moments to share his talent in ways he had never imagined. But even as doors opened, he remained humble, remembering that it was not about fame or recognition. It was about connection, about sharing what had always been a part of him, and inspiring others to believe that their own hidden gifts mattered. The story of that day spread quietly at first, from one person to another, then more widely. People remembered the janitor who had stunned them with a piano, who had turned a casual lobby into a place of magic, and who had reminded them that extraordinary talent often hides in the most unexpected places. And for the janitor himself, it was not the attention that mattered, but the realization that he had made a difference, not just through music, but through courage, humility, and the simple act of being willing to step forward. And so, life continued, but nothing was quite the same. The janitor still worked quietly, sweeping floors and tidying spaces. But now, he carried a quiet confidence, a sense of fulfillment, and the knowledge that he had touched hearts. The piano, once a silent companion, had become a bridge, a way to connect, inspire, and leave a lasting impression. He had revealed his secret, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone that greatness is not always visible at first glance, but it can shine brilliantly when given a chance.